All right. Okay, thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Maker and Learning Institute podcast series. If you've been with us, the one we've just had a couple of weeks ago, welcome back. And if this is your first time with us, welcome. Tonight, in the Making and Learning Institute's podcast, we're so happy to have Lorna LaRiviere from the Brunswick School in Connecticut with us. And Lorna will introduce herself and tell you what she's up to at Brunswick in a couple of minutes. But just some quick background on the Making and Learning Institute. The Making and Learning Institute is in its fourth iteration. It's a Making and Learning Institute located at the Marymount School of New York on 5th Avenue and 84th Street. And it is co-directed by Eric Walters and I. We started it 3 years ago. We're into our fourth with some funding from the Edward E. Ford Foundation. And the original big idea was to try and shift the paradigm of professional development in education. And so we've played a lot with different types of things in that MLI. We've had innovation coaching, we've had half-day immersion experiences, we've had student conversations, we've had parent talks. And this year we wanted to play with a new channel, which is a podcast. So we're going to do a series of podcasts over the next 4 months. This is the second one. And the podcasts are essentially all around the theme of design, making, and learning. At this stage, so far with the MLI, we've had over 500 attendees from over 100 schools. So we're really pleased with the turnout of this. But tonight, our specific topic is design thinking in the middle school art class. And we're happy to have Lorna LaRiviere here with us for a conversation about that, about design thinking. So let me pass it to Lorna to introduce herself, and she will tell you a little bit about the work she does, and that will lead us into a conversation with me and Lorna and our audience participation. Welcome, Lorna.
Thank you. I teach in an all-boy middle school in Connecticut, as Don said, and I teach grades 5th grade through 8th grade. All the students in my middle school are required to take art, which is one of the big reasons why we started working there, is that rather than it being something that you select, it is really something that everyone does. So again, it is then can be I have to access everybody. And what I've noticed over the last 10 years, though, is there's this shift in students not just working in the art room to experience the materials or to gain the skills, but that there was far too much emphasis or too many questions they had about, how am I doing? Is it good? What is my grade? And so I really started to question my methods of teaching and my methods of what I always was instructed, which is it's based on skills. And there certainly was a process with the end product being something that would go on the wall. So I decided that what I really wanted to do was, I had gone to art school for fine arts, but what I always was interested when I went to Rhode Island School of Design were the people in the industrial design department, because they came up with these amazing products. So I went back to RISD a few summers ago, and again, through Amy Leideke, who was my professor there, started to really look more carefully at the process. And I found that working with these students in the summer, that the process of what Amy had us do through designing, and our example was a bus stop, what I found was it translated perfectly to a middle school student classroom. And again, the difference from, say, a fine arts is there's a big research component in industrial design, in addition to there being teamwork or group projects. So that is a big shift from someone's individual artwork, which is simply their own idea. So having done that for a couple of summers and having followed Amy Leideke's lesson, I met with Don Buckley a few years ago when they started the MLI workshop. And I really have incorporated his method of design thinking in addition to what Amy has done. And that is really in the way that I will do these very fast lessons. So rather than something that's long-term, with Don's method of design thinking, I then can do something more rapidly. So it might be a team of for over 3 classes maybe, rather than over an entire 10 weeks period. So that was really, again, a big shift. You're getting students more, not to worry so much about what the end product is that they work with, but really to get them to think about this process. So I'm just going to share the screen now, and you can see this keynote that I presented. And all right, I'm going to need help, Eric, on this one. Go to this. Is this visible?
Not yet. Click on where it says share screen down the bottom.
Okay, thought I did that. Hold on a second. Share computer, share screen, got it.
Yep.
Is that
Yeah.
visible?
Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, so again, I started then, as it says, and again, the key difference between fine arts is that you are getting these students to think about a problem. So our problem at that time was to increase bus ridership, and it really was through designing a bus stop that people would want to wait at. I spent the first night when my teacher sent us home to do homework, and I created something that I thought would be aesthetically pleasing. But when she took me through the process of design thinking and had me go in to interview people, I totally tossed away any of my ideas because they had absolutely nothing to do with what it really meant to be somebody that rode the bus. So again, by myself riding the bus and by listening to them, there were some key things that I needed to incorporate. So I also, as I mentioned, met with Don Buckley, probably 3 years ago, but he has this terrific plan of getting together a group of people and have them sit together and come up with any pain points in their day. So he'd have us do a timeline from 6 a.m. through 8 p.m. And students would all come up with what is it in their day that they don't like. And I found it was anything from the lunch line, which is way too long, to the lockers that are set up. And if you have an upper locker, your books drop down on the head of the person in a lower locker, or even things that they noticed that were a problem in terms of traffic patterns at pickup and drop off. So again, everyone totally understands what these problems are, and that really helped them coming up with change or different solutions. We are going to be moving our middle school across the street. So my hypothetical became, what will you do with the new campus? So this is then a real world problem, and I found that students really do gravitate towards that. They see some sort of big benefit to their design thinking. Through group work, which all teachers will know can sometimes be tricky, you can quite often have one student taking over the project, somebody who feels they have more skills, and you can even sometimes have very passive students sitting back. But again, with John's whole structure, I never saw that. I saw that really they all became actively involved, and they all worked far more on a consensus. And that's again driven by the fact that they chose exactly what their problem would be. So this again was just a key thing. And in retrofitting a corporate office space to a school, there's so many opportunities that they found. Another thing that, again, I've noticed, I mentioned over 10 years with this anxiety about their grade is I really felt that middle school boys were being given sort of academic work that was so structured, and there was so much limited time for play, that I found that there's this terrific sort of very sophisticated group of toys, which in some play situations are geared towards anyone as young as 6. But I decided to purchase several of these rigamajigs. And a rigamajig, as you can see in this slide, is really large-scale wooden pieces with plastic bolts that they can rapidly, again, work together to build something. So this is really the jumping off point before they would do their design thinking. I just give them a 40-minute period of play. So they love doing this. There is no set, unlike a Lego where you have to have a very finished product, the rigamajig is completely open-ended. So again, this really gets them in that mindset of coming up with something together. So we've got a variety of things from vehicles to vehicles that are also animals. And again, they're about 14 years old, and they really do rapidly jump into or dive into this. These are just showing you slides of students that are sitting down. Most of these quick design thinking things are just simple sketches. So then they again, you can see they're all engaged in it. And I just go through what Don taught me, which is the key thing to having a design thinking stage is You've got to define the problem. So I really force my students, don't just go over the problem rapidly. You really need to list what are all the problems with whatever this issue is, whether it's the lunchroom or getting from one campus to another. So I'm just going to go through some slides of what they did. And this one I had no idea existed, but they have a system where the garbage is at the back of our shuttle bus that takes us to our upper school campus. And then you need to take the filled garbage bag and pass it over the heads of all the students. Nobody likes to have garbage thrown over their heads. So here they've created something called the buck, which is sort of it's on a conveyor belt that rides down the middle aisle of the bus, and that's where the garbage goes. So it was a design problem I had no idea existed because I don't ride the student bus. Other issues are, again, I mentioned going between campuses. And similar to City Bike, they came up with a system where you could take out a bike. You would be, when you swipe your card, it would be identified that you took the bike out, and it would again rapidly get you from one campus to the other so that you are not late. And other students came up with a tram. So here you can see the totally enclosed bridge, which can be both for walking pedestrians, as well as you can see the tram there in the background. And what they did is really thinking through, you can see, writing down the problem, the solution, and even details of how do you see this built? What would it be made of? How many people will fit in the tram? And so sitting in the art room class, they could work with a ruler, actually line people up and calculate the space that's needed. Other areas, as I mentioned earlier, that are a big problem or complaint from students is too many people wait a long time getting lunch. So to feed 75 students and they have about 20 minutes and the line is too long. So something all of us would come up with is just dividing it, but they have it set up the way that they would like to have it be set up. And here someone came up with the idea of a scooter, similar to a city bike or just getting your own bike. What I found interesting with this group of students is they not only came up with the idea, calculated the cost, but the other thing that one student did was he had a scooter at his home, and he decided to take the scooter from his house to his nearby bus stop, get on the bus folding up his scooter, and bring it with him in his backpack to see if it's actually a realistic, manageable thing to do. And he came up with a conclusion that it does work. So that's really a form of active research. So as opposed to them always researching simply by sitting with a laptop, they have to actually go out there and test things. And here you can see they don't have driver's licenses, but they have great ideas on how cars should drop off and pick up students. So really, really thought through carefully. Again, much resembling sort of something closer to the problem you might have at JFK Airport or LaGuardia, where you're moved along really rapidly. They chose to split up the grade levels, just the way they have the taxis often on one side and the regular cars in another. So this again is something they see daily as an issue. And just again, what I always incorporate in any of the design thinking problems that I do is to make sure they go through the iterative process, which is to review it, revise it, and then refine it. In terms of reviewing it, I really follow Don has a terrific way for feedback. And he says that whenever students are presenting, they need to think of just 3 things. This is the way you can begin your comments. You may say, I like, and that is where they will say something positive about the student's work. They can say, I wish, and that's where constructive criticism can be given. And I wonder is really left for ideas, as I always say, if you had more time, is where students could say, I wonder, and that would be if they would expand it. So all of Don's methods, again, help to bring middle school students back, and it helps, again, to sort of conclude this process of design thinking. And then here, these are sort of longer term projects that I mentioned, that bus stop one. So here, rather than everything being sketched on paper, this is a lot of skills working with foam core. And so coming up with an idea for students, how are you going to increase riderships up to our campus? Then it saves, of course, wear and tear on the roads, time of the drivers, and how can you make it appealing? And through interviewing, the students wanted free Wi-Fi, heated seats. They wanted to have plenty of room for their backpacks. So they worked through all of these things, and again, a design thinking method, but still gaining those art or architectural model building skills. So that one shows you there. And I will also introduce with the design thinking companies that do this type of work. And Don is the one who introduced me to frog design. And what this really gives students is they tend to think of art as something that they will never do again. But what I always say that when you're working, you have to realize that what people are looking for when they're hiring is they are looking for people who are creative, who are adaptable. And so I give them the example of frog design who might work in even the medical field, as well as in some sort of a digital capacity. And so I say that they bring together people who have many different skills. So again, that really just sort of is the kinds of slides that I share with the students. So that's what I have in terms of sharing the screen. I did not focus as heavily on the finished projects, but I really wanted to talk more about the process. So how should I unshare the screen with this, Eric?
Yep, unshare it down the bottom.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. Not finding it. Let's see. Stop share? Yeah, stop
share.
Got it. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so that's kind of, again, how I'm using design thinking in the art classroom.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Lorna. Eric, how are we doing with sound there? Has it dropped a bit, or are we good?
Well, everybody's clear.
Okay, maybe I'm just deaf in one ear then at this point. Anyway, thanks, Lorna. That's awesome. So I just want to summarize by saying, I mean, it's like what you've done here, which is so awesome, is like force these kids to think about purpose and not about passion. Why we see a lot of projects fail is that they're an individual passion of a student, but where projects are successful is when there's a sense of purpose to the whole group. And the purpose is actually cultivated, which you've obviously done with your students, which is awesome because you're letting them solve a problem that has purpose to all of them. Going right back to where you started, which was the research piece, can you talk to the audience a little bit more about this design research, what some of those methods are? Because what I often find is in the world of education, we look at research as in the very traditional way that you would research for a paper in a history class. But there is a whole world of design research, which is unknown to educators, yet so valuable to actually, such valuable methods to learn. So
yeah, I was really lucky to take the class at RISD with Amy Leideke because she exposed me to that. And as I said, she sent us home to do homework. And what did I do? And I said, and my students will all say, I'll bet you Googled bus stops. And I said, that's exactly right. And that's sort of all I did. And that's exactly why my bus stop design was not, it would not help riders. So what instead I find these are the types of research I will work with, and that is certainly interview. So I ask my students to go out and speak to the people who would use whatever it is you want to change and get feedback from them. Don't just speak to one age group. So I do have them speaking to the adults that are in the building. They even go out and find people who are in our security guards. So get a good range. Don't just get people in your own grade. Other methods of research, and this really goes specifically to industrial design and architectural models, is something called body storming. Body storming is actually, as it sounds, you actually take yourself, put your backpack on, carry your hockey bag, and sit down and tape off what height would be the most comfortable to sit in. What is the correct width? It's probably a little bit wider than the amount of space that they usually give you on, for instance, a typical bus stop. So those are the methods of research that will relate directly back. Other things are persona, and that would be looking at who is your end user. And so you sort of write up all those personas and create those. Certainly image boards are used, and that is a form of working on a laptop and looking up images, printing them out. And other ones that I've used is data. And data, for instance, going back to something like the bus stop, is they need to contact the Board of Ed in our town, and they need to get the numbers on the number of people that ride the bus. But in addition to that, because they're changing it, bus routes are set. Well, I say, why don't you change them? Because the bus route for one group takes 45 minutes, and it's because they make too many stops. So that is, again, I see it as a different kind of research than perhaps history teachers use typically. And they're so involved with it that they like seeing these different methods. Certainly artifacts is another way that I've known people to use artifacts as a way for research. And I've always mentioned that, again, history teachers, rather than just always using the written, but to ask people to bring in artifacts. If you're studying World War II, certainly enough people have families, and you learn by looking at those items as well.
Right, right. Where would you recommend the audience starts with this, Lorna? Is there, if you to choose one place to go or one book to source this, what would that be?
I would definitely say the 100 Universal Methods of Design is really a great book. And I've identified that in the Pitch to Prototype book that Marymount published. I give that as a resource. That is really a good way to go. And even as you mentioned, Frog Design. And so I just went to their website, and if you just start reading and looking at the kind of work that Frog does, it starts to at least open your thoughts up to how can you make, as what you said, how can you get kids to create lessons or work with something that gives them purpose? Because that's a current company. So that's
Right.
another way.
Yeah, that's just so great, Lorna, because like what you're doing here is going outside of the industry, you know, to look for this. And that's what's so important, that we bring these into the norm of education, which is what you've done. You're looking at other landscapes, you know, and that's so important. So, Laura, the other technique that I use a lot, and I'm sure you do as well, and I'd love for you to talk more about the audience, is the observation piece of research and how you get your students to be better observers.
That's a really good one. To get them to be good observers is, for instance, ask them to go downstairs, sit in the lunchroom. They're not getting their own food. They're not with their own grade level. Sit there and notice things, patterns, walking patterns. Notice, where do people even go to cross from the food line over to a table, and why? Where are the areas of congestion? So by being an observer, it does mean going to whatever the site is and seeing, just as I mentioned, that great idea of that they came up with, the passing the garbage over people's heads on a bus. They're the actual observers of that. I am not familiar with it. I don't understand how painful that is. I can imagine how painful it is, but I know if I rode that shuttle one day, I would be sure I get something in there within a week. So by being an observer, you do gain empathy. Just as I mentioned, by my taking a bus in Providence and talking to people who ride the bus, I gained empathy compared to my getting in my car and driving around alone. So the observer piece is really critical in industrial design and in any design coming up with a solution.
Right, right. So going back to the design cycle, we know to help define the problem and come up with possible or many solutions, the research stage is so important, and you spend quite a chunk of time. So when you set your students off to do their research and they go through these multiple methods, how do you get them to download those and make some sense? Is there any good way that you can share with the audience on what's best to do this?
Sure, there are a couple of ways. So they are all given a team to work with, and they're given 2 days for 2 40-minute periods to do the research, and then they have to present. So it's a very structured presentation amount of time. So they know they're going to be presenting to the entire group. The idea is then, even though if I'm not on the measurement team, I don't need to spend my time going out back and doing a photo study or measurement, but somebody in the room has already got that. It's printed, it's on a board. So when I'm doing my individual design, I can go look at it. We've also collected things in Google Doc. We work with Google Classroom in my school. And so that's a way that everything is shared through that. So that's how the research, if you're asking how is it collected and how can they access it. Another method that I am doing is, when I started this lesson, there's a girls' school across the street, and I thought, what would they think of doing this lesson as well and having us share? These are two same age, but different schools. And so we're each doing the same project, and we're going to get together and share the entire project from research to the finished. And so that's a way, again, taking them outside of their comfort zone of just being with the boys in the class to some students are coming over. Be prepared that a lot of their work is going to be better than yours. So those kinds of things kind of get them, they think a little bit more, they reflect more on what am I going to say and what does this research mean to my end result. So I'd say those are things, get together with other groups. And as you mentioned, it could be through Zoom. There are many ways you can do it if you can't physically get together.
Right. So Lorna, do you actually get each group to present back to the whole?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, the group has to present to the whole class. Yes.
Right. And with that, then they're learning, they're reinforcing the methods that they used, and also the other students may be learning of ones that they didn't use, or they could go back and do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they're doing that.
That's great. So you're just reinforcing the whole design research piece.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So in a situation like that, because I'm fascinated that they report all their findings back to each other, do you find groups wanting to now go back on the fact-finding mission again?
They love the interview mission. They definitely, they like to get out and they like to talk to people. The most challenging one can be the data. That's something that, again, it has to do with the age that is a little bit, little outside of the kinds of things they've thought of, because it can involve sort of city planning. It can involve things like that. But that will be the biggest reach, but they definitely enjoy doing this. I also forgot to mention that one of the big parts of this lesson that I do, there's a terrific documentary called Urbanized. And Urbanized is wonderful because it cites cities across the world, and it looks at things such as public transportation, public housing. It even has a whole feature on the High Line, which in New York City has really totally transformed an entire area of Manhattan and revitalized it, and is now really changed against this. And you see how the people that prevented those rail yards from being torn down, they turned it into something that is very different. And you can see High Line knockoffs being created in other cities. I've seen them in Dallas, and in Denver, where they're trying to do the similar thing. So again, that's another way that I get them to see that this is happening out there in the real world and how the research is used.
Right, right. That's great. So the students now, they've done all their research and they've come up with a problem statement as such. They try to define this problem. And obviously you're going to push them into you're going to get them to diverge again and push them into the ideation phase. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about that? Do you have any good ideation methods that you feel work for middle school students?
I do. And the biggest one is, and again, it's breaking from that traditional fine arts method, which is you're going to do what's called a sketch model. And a sketch model is a three-dimensional quick sketch. So you're just working with duct tape and corrugated cardboard. And it's where if you have a certain roof line that you want to test out, you physically test it, but in a very rapid way and not being fussy about how it's cut or making sure it's absolutely perfect, but it's a way that you can test things and change. So the sketch model is really a great way so that they see that the first idea may not be their best. Because again, I find that they want to just, as I said before, they get that question of, what do you want me to do? They want to sort of just get it done. And I was trying to avoid that and getting them into work through the process. So a sketch model is a good way. Obviously they do quick sketches too, but even just by looking at each other's work and seeing what other people are doing, that's always a very valuable way as part of the iterative process.
Right. Yeah. So Laura, with that sketch model, do you start the feedback loop right there?
Yes, I do. I will meet with all of them. In other words, they can't progress from one phase until everyone's presented their research. You're going to go into a sketch, which I look at, a sketch model, and I don't let them use the finished foam core until I've gone through the sketch model. And that's kind of where I'll look at it and I'll say things like, what is your scale? And I'll point to a doorway, and that's the area that they will typically make so it's about 3 feet tall. So because I do ask that things are to scale, you get everything right in your sketch model, definitely.
Right. And that feedback just comes from you, not from the other students at this point.
That one will, but certainly there's students all around. They're not shy, and they can, I mean, in other words, this is not a private conversation. I'm in an open studio and people are all around. So again, they hear from each other, and they often will help each other out, which is good to see. And that's but that's very typical of the studio art kind of environment compared to an English class or history class, where it really is the teacher and the student and not necessarily always involving the group in the making of an essay. This is the making of the bus stop involves so many people, or whatever your design problem is, there are many involved.
Right, right. So Laura, because we're in such a unreal environment in schools and we have limited time, like, what do you do with iterations? How do you manage iterations? Because in the real world, we'll iterate till we get it right. And like, talk to the audience a little bit about that.
About time. Time is, I do agree. In the best world, they would be in my classroom for 2 weeks, and we could do a few projects, and you could just stay there from 8 till 4 and eat lunch when you're hungry and not be locked into all these schedules. So as any teacher will tell you, that is the challenging part. So I will give them rough deadlines. Some people move faster than others, but you certainly have time to, if I stop working on an assignment and if someone isn't finished, then they can come in before school. But I do find that students are generally really able to do that. And other students will do extension projects. And so they'll do more of the 2-point perspective sketching or something that is related to the project, but it doesn't stop them from continuing to grow in the same area. But pacing is the hardest aspect of teaching art, and it has to do with the supplies that you have out at a time.
Right. So like with iteration and that very important part of the design cycle, is this their first exposure to iteration, like in the middle school?
I can't say that I've seen every class at the lower school, but it definitely is the first time where they're being asked to maybe change things. I think it's very typical of middle school that I don't just have them come up to make the first idea they come up with. So probably all the design thinking is the beginning of the iterative process, but all I say to them, it's no different than when your English teacher has you edit something or rewrite it so that they understand the importance of it. So I do find that for some it's a struggle, but it is really important to do that.
Yeah, that is a great analogy, you know, the rough draft piece.
Yes.
Because they are so used to doing a lot of writing, and then, you know, it's like, oh, well, it's a rough draft and you can do this multiple times. So what I've been wondering about this iteration and comparing it to rough drafts, do you think Google Docs has helped with this, with changing the mindset?
I'm not sure. I know that Google Docs is a great way that several people can share things, certainly, and it has to do with the time. So you can add them when it's you know, whatever convenient for you. I do think that helps a lot with students, and I even am aware that students spend time at night all the time, just sort of in terms of helping each other out on homework, and that I think that's great. There are a lot of positive things I think with it, with having it. For me, by using Google Docs or really Google Classroom, the big positive for me is I'm not tracking down some artwork which doesn't have a name on it. I can just pull it up on my screen and I see this whole process from the original sketch, the sketch model, the finished bus stop, an essay, and then, you know, that 2-point perspective sketch. And so that's what I like, which is very similar to, there's a lot of conversation about portfolios, and portfolios, not just in an art world, but a classroom portfolio. So I think there's an advantage.
Right. And so then when you know, you're moving them into the prototype, when they prototype, do you have like specific types of prototypes you push the students to for certain projects? If it, you know, if it is a continuous sketch, or is it a 3D model? Do you constrain the materials? How do you go about deciding how they're going to prototype?
That, again, when you, that is for an art teacher, that's sort of a skill you develop. And I do have my set materials on a cart and all the supplies that go with that. So it isn't like you can come in and say, well, I want to work with clay on this. I am saying these are the materials that architectural models are made of. These are what, this is exactly, again, as I was taught when I went back to RISD, this is the way that they do it. So I do have to structure that piece to it. I definitely see that, but I will then at other times, because they've used the skills in cutting and in working off of what are called nets, that helps them visualize the three-dimensional modeling. That's the part that I find you've really got to work with them on, so they know, they don't just look at a flat drawing. They have no concept of how to make it three-dimensional. And mostly what I have to force them to is, I say, I don't want this to look like it's a shoebox on its side. You've got to rethink roof lines, entryways, and windows, that kind of thing.
Right, right. Because what I find with students and adults without design experience in prototyping, you really have to help them understand how certain materials will help the audience sort of understand what the problem is they're trying to solve.
Yes.
You know, like when do you use Play-Doh, when do you use toothpicks and tape and all of that, and how can you actually convey what the problem is you're solving for in that prototype, which is the real thing you're trying to do. It's an expression almost of what the solution is.
Right, and yet you don't want, as you mentioned, you don't want all the tape to get in your way. You need to make it visually understandable, and yet it's obviously not something that's been manufactured professionally. So that's where they gain a lot of confidence. And that is where I will get students who maybe never thought of themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of times people narrow their field of art to, they only think of drawing. They don't think of so many other things are involved. So when they gain skills, and a lot of people do well with the 3D modeling, that makes a difference. But I don't want to see a lot of duct tape wrapped around a finished model, or a lot of marker, or just what you're saying, things that would get in the way.
Right, right. And so like racing through to the end of the design cycle when they have some possible solution, and, you know, educators continually banter on with authenticity and authentic audiences. Is that where you bring in like other teachers or parents or experts from the fields? Can you give an example?
I will usually bring in other teachers to listen to the presentations. I also bring my RISD professor, Amy Leideke, is coming down in the end of March. I bring her in, and that is something that helps, I think, students to gain an understanding. She'll talk a lot about the kind of work she's done. A lot of it is in the medical field. So things that again, as you said, it takes it out of the realm of education when you have someone from the outside come in, and that is very, very valuable.
Yeah, no, it is, so that the students see other experts or hear from them, hear different points of view at least, which again is a big part of the empathy piece. So we haven't talked about this, but I just want to throw it in there, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. But, you know, the design process, design thinking process, we can break into two parts: methods and mindsets. And I always tell whoever I'm working with on the outset that I can teach them methods, but if within a culture of a school or wherever that is, they also have to work on the changing mindsets, and I can't do that. They have to do it.
Yes.
Have you seen, like, can you talk, and I know it's a really tricky, how do we measure mindsets? You know, I always ask the question to an audience, like, who in the audience, does anyone here have a fixed mindset? Of course, no one will say they have a fixed mindset.
Right.
But have you any examples of seeing mindset changes in the students when they
a lot. I'll tell you that, and it really is typically students that when I start to describe what the assignment is, I get this look like they're They're so excited. They had no idea. They would never associate what I was asking them to do with an art class. And that probably is what I see, again, for this method of design thinking is the most positive thing to come out of that. And that is that a student, you don't just have the one who has always done very well and artwork is put on the wall. You really draw them in. And the biggest change thing I could see is class is over and I can't get them out of there. They don't want to stop. Even if the lunch block is next, they want to keep working. So I would say that the mindset there is they want to be there because it is a project that they came up with. So it does help that sort of what might have been a fixed mindset in art is going to be where I have to have this one set end result. And it's not like that at all.
Yeah, because it's just so, I mean, that's the hard part of the design thinking process, and particularly bringing it into education is the mindset piece. So Laura, you know, we've raced people through the design cycle, which you're an expert in, and I know, you know, some pieces as well, but what I'm thinking about with the audience, we've raced them through the full design cycle. They've hopefully picked up bits and pieces, but if you had to do the one sentence on what is design thinking, how would you snapshot that for the audience? No pressure.
No pressure. One sentence. What is design thinking? Change. I would say it's to change something to improve any aspect of your daily life. And I could even say, and don't narrow it just to, as you did with us, with what is your day, but try to think about other people who do really have, where change really needs to happen. And I will bring in things like the medical field, where there's a lot of design changes that have happened within hospitals, within hospital waiting rooms, within hospital operating rooms that have altered this to make it really, they think about empathy now. So I would say, that's sort of the importance of design thinking.
Mm. And Laurie, you mentioned earlier as well about like doing really fast, quick activities, you know. Do you ever just pick one part of the design cycle and focus on that, and then just like maybe prototyping, rapid prototyping?
Yes, I do rapid prototyping. I'll do design a chair for the person you're seated next to. And that's a rapid prototyping only because they're very small. The models are about 6 inches and they're only made out of paper. So the rapid prototyping, the research part is you have to speak to the person next to you. You have to, in one class, and with tape, scissors, and paper, and a Sharpie, you have to rapidly come up with a chair design. And they do come up with far more imaginative chairs than I ever would have thought of. So that's the quick, rapid one day. The rigamajig is more of I always think of that as like a drill. So the rigamajig is just get you the process of building. So sort of between the rigamajig and rapid chair designs, those are things.
Yeah, no, I love that rigamajig, because what I thought that was all about was inspiration.
Yes.
You've totally pumped them up, you've inspired them, and they're ready to go. And I feel that's often an overlooked part when people get into the design process, because if you don't have that inspiration piece, it falls flat.
It does.
So it totally is worth, you know, doing a great kickoff, or, you know, really thinking through, well, what will they build, you know, and as you said, that's a big passion piece with them, you know, with what I saw of the prototypes they came up with,
right?
But sort of, you know, sparks them, they're inspired, and it's wow, and they want to go on and, you know, do something else.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So Laura, we've got a bunch of people listening here, and, you know, you and I will end the conversation because Eric will click and we'll be gone. But like as a takeaway to, you know, when we talk about design, we really need to think about the exit of that, or what will people go off with. What would you tell them they should do tomorrow if they were to start a design thinking initiative in a school? That may be too lofty, or if they could, is there something they could practice, or what would you recommend, one thing?
I could recommend, and it really doesn't matter what subject you teach, but that they do just take something that, as you mentioned, that they got into a routine that they have out of habit. and it might even be homework. Redesign the way that you are asking students to do homework, because all too often, again, what I hear students say is they're not really gaining much from it. So again, you sit down, if you become familiar with any of these design firms or read some of these books that we had talked about that Frog Design has written, it might get you to change. And so you gain some sort of, students are no longer look at school as just work and just not being fun, but just alter it a bit. And the design thinking is it is coming from the student. So it's not teacher-driven assignments, it is student-driven assignments. And that will make them connect in any subject that you teach.
Right, right.
So we have two questions.
Fantastic.
The first one is from Lucy. She wants to know from Lorna, how many people in each group do you feel works best?
I always like 3. 4, someone sits back passively, and 2, there's just too much kind of work to be done or types of work. But generally, I like it when there are groups of 3.
Interesting. Wow.
And then the second question we have is one of the sort of challenges of weaving design thinking and this sort of new approach to teaching and learning is, how do you cover all the content that you need to cover? So Dawn and I have had many, many conversations about this, about sort of that balance between exploratory learning, problem solving, design thinking, and the need for some teachers to feel like, if I do something like this, how do I, cover my content? And it sounds like you've sort of reached a really nice balance between, I'm reimagining what I used to do, but doing it from this perspective. So I was wondering if you could talk to that, about sort of how your curriculum has shifted, or if it has, or if it hasn't, and sort of how you feel about it and how the students feel about it.
My curriculum has totally shifted, and it really goes back to what I said to you earlier, with the way that I learned, the way that K through 12 arts programs sort of became in the 80s. They became so, as their principles are design driven, so discipline based, and it really was to try to make it more of what I call an academic type subject. And I really feel the exploratory is essential. In terms of content, I do think it's important to know how to work with tools, how to work with materials, when it is the right material to get the end result that you want. But I really have infused all of this design thinking across all grades. I do far more group work. I do still do interdisciplinary work, and I recently did one where I asked students to be curators of a museum exhibit, and I'll just relate it to whatever their subject is in history. Mm-hmm. So you could see, again, there's more teamwork, as opposed to that fine artist who does whatever his own idea is and doesn't sort of think of the rest of the world. So my curriculum has dramatically shifted, I would say. And what do I worry about in terms of covering content? And there's this great line that I heard that is, you really want to gain creative confidence. And so as long as they're gaining creative confidence through whatever I'm teaching, that's what matters. And I'm not missing out on anything.
Excellent. Great answer.
Yeah, it is. That's a big mindset change right there.
If anybody else has any questions, you can certainly type them in the chat box or unmute your sound. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Dawn.
Yeah. So let's see, where are we? Okay, so I guess we're almost out of time to close, Eric, are we? Is it?
Yep, we have a few more minutes, but if you want to wrap it up.
No, we have.
Absolutely.
No, I just want to, Laura, is there anything that I haven't asked, or the audience, that you feel would be a good close for our conversation?
I guess the only thing I would say is the biggest thing, and it's going to sound cliche, don't be afraid to try something different. I feel as though the real reason teachers hesitate to try these kinds of things is they are harder for teachers. Things will be messy. Things will be noisy. And those are two things that teachers traditionally do not like and they try to avoid. But they really are important in engaging your students in being interested in what you're teaching. So again, you've got to break away from that, trying to control the classroom, which you might have always thought was the way that you should be. And you are certainly when you get an education degree. So it does take just, again, try something and don't be afraid of those, of how it ends up until you'll just refine it. You yourself will find you'll get better at it.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to send our audience off, Lorna. And yeah, I want to thank you for the conversation and dialogue tonight. It's been great. I can tell you're passionate about this process, and it's always great for me to bounce stuff off teachers that really want to do this and get it. You know,
thanks to you too, Don, because again, you're in there, you don't know it, but you're in there with all my classrooms, with all the words.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm hoping to come up to visit soon.
Come visit.
Great spaces. So thanks again, Lorna. Hopefully I'll see you face to face soon. Eric, thank you for being the man behind the curtain again and orchestrating all this technology, which Eric always does an awesome job with taking this on. So we're about to sign out from this podcast this week. And our next podcast is March 14, Eric?
That is correct. With Lisa Yokana from Scarsdale High School. She'll be talking about discovering innovation mindsets.
Right.
And we hope to join us for that.
Yeah, and Eric has kindly moved that date because I'll be at NAIS the week before, if any of our listeners will be there. I'll be down there doing a workshop around design, and it'd be great to see you down there if anyone is. But if not there in the flesh, we'll see you back on the air at March 14th with Lisa Yokana. Thanks everyone for listening in tonight.
Thank you.
Great evening. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks.